Say, where'd you learn to dunk? Finishing school? I actually learned it in the movies, and I am proud of it. Here we are again, my friends. Welcome to another episode of the Top 10 Best Films made by some of the greatest directors in all of cinema. You got me. Yeah. I'm starting from 10, of course, and then filibustering, lassoing the moon, all the way up to number 1. And hee-haw! I certainly have seen every film attainable of these artists, folks. You got that right. So every list on here comes from the sincerest, sentimentalist, and justifiable accuracy. Happy New Year, my friends, and here we are starting it off with one of the greatest directors in film history. He is quite the inspiration for countless Oscar-winning directors around the world, and is definitely one of my big inspirations, not just in film, but in life, really. The one and only Frank Capra. Born as Francesco Rosario Capra in a village near Palermo, Sicily, the youngest of 7, his family immigrated to America on the worst 13-day journey of his life, Frank said, when he was only 5 years old. Making their way to New York Harbor, his father sang to the young Francesco as they stare at the Statue of Liberty, "That's the greatest light since the Star of Bethlehem. That's the light of freedom. Remember that. Freedom." They moved to LA, where Frank studied at the California Institute of Technology, amazingly, majoring in chemical engineering. He served in the Army during World War I as a second lieutenant, but was discharged and went back home to take odd jobs. Growing up in the Sicilian ghetto in LA, he had to break away and become successful for the sake of his family. You'll love how he got into the picture business. He saw an ad for a new movie studio opening in San Francisco, and he lied, saying he had a lot of film experience so he could get a job. Capra said it was his utter cockiness that got him places, and it certainly does go a long way, making his first silent reel in 2 days, receiving $75. His rise to more serious jobs came once famed producer Harry Cohn saw his potential and partnered him up with Hal Roach of The Little Rascals and Max Sennett, the great silent film comedy director who would help Charlie Chaplin, of course, and the big silent film star of the time, Harry Langdon. His ultimate partnership with Harry Cohn became the biggest boost once Harry Cohn renamed his production studio Columbia Pictures, and America would come to know and be inspired by the incoming greatness of Frank Capra. If you're new to classic film here, folks, you must know immediately that Frank Capra is indeed one of the greatest and highly praised legendary film directors of all time, because he was a director that brought real life to film. Like his amazing contemporary John Ford, whom respected and admired Frank, he brought such levity and tributing light to the everyman, the little man, and made sentimentality so powerful that you could not help but be charmed by it. Some, if not all, film historians will tell you that's why he rightly earns his nickname of film entitled CAPRA-CORN, being that his films would be so corny. And well, my friends, to today's standards, sure, they might be too much, but I say, if you still have a heart, then you connect with Frank Capra's films just fine. Capra just had a phenomenal ability to bring out the next best star, to bring out the best in them. All the greats such as Clark Gable, Claudette Colbert, Gary Cooper, Warren Williams, Ronald Colman, Jean Arthur, and of course, Jimmy Stewart and Barbara Stanwyck. Not to mention his whole stock company he would use constantly, like Thomas Mitchell, H.B. Warner, Beulah Bondi, Edward Arnold, Ward Bond, among many, many others. As many have said, with his tenacious spirit on film sets, his giving energy to his actors and crew, his brilliant sense of attacking important subjects, that he really was America personified. So listen, I'll take you on a bender that will live in your memory as a thing of beauty and a joy forever as we get started and lasso the moon on the top 10 best films of the greatest director to really personify the American dream, Frank Capra. Now, starting off at number 10, we have American Madness, which I'm quite sure is very surprising for you all. It surprised even me, but after revisiting this film again, after about 5 years, I couldn't help but be so impacted and blown away by Capra's confidence and how he handled this story about a banker, Dixon, played very well, of course, by Walter Houston, who is forced to resign by his board of directors. But after he refuses, his bank is suddenly robbed, and everyone becomes a suspect, most notably an ex-con, Matt, played by Pat O'Brien, who is so prideful of revealing his alibi. All the while, the talk of deception and corruption take over the city, all during the heat of the Great Depression. The film has a lot going on, and once again, Frank Capra guides it so thrillingly that there are times and shots that make you forget it was Capra who directed this piece. Capra actually took over the picture after Alan Dwan, whom, according to others, was not giving the piece what it needed. Some edge and blood, and Capra came in and went balls to the wall, basically incorporating into the story the attitudes of real-life banks, most notably the founder of Bank of America. The film also marked the first collaboration between screenwriter Robert Riskin and Capra, and would be a loyal partnership for years and years. Number 9, Broadway Bill. An absolutely delightful and engaging film from start to finish that every audience member falls in love with every time they see it, myself included. Based on the short story Strictly Confidential by Mark Hellinger, screenplay, of course, by Robert Riskin. Here we have Dan Brooks, played by Warner Baxter, a frustrated son-in-law of a rich tycoon who makes a few changes by quitting his job and devotes his life to racing his beloved horse, Broadway Bill, going as far as competing him in every derby there is. But he can't do it without the lovely help of the princess, played magnificently, of course, by Myrna Loy. You can absolutely tell Capra loved this story, and you can feel the excitement, the thunderous energy in every one of his racing scenes that are shot so terrifically. Capra had the brilliant idea of changing its original happy ending to have a bittersweet ending, showing such a deep and remarkable result of what American success can be. If you haven't seen it, I won't spoil it too much, but if you know, you know. And how Capra shoots it and how it happens so damn suddenly in the midst of victory. My God, it's like a punch in the stomach. Even after its success, Capra said he was still disappointed in it, wanted to remake the story, mainly because of actor Warner Baxter and how afraid he was of horses, which Capra did 16 years later, remade it with Riding High, which is a lovely musical adaptation itself, with good old Bing Crosby. But in my opinion, Broadway Bill is the finer and more enthralling film of the story in my book. Number 8, You Can't Take It With You. Yes, indeed, the classic film adaptation of the Pulitzer Prize-winning play by Hart and Kaufman, which earned 7 Oscar nominations, but most notably earning Capra his 3rd and final Academy Award for Best Director. Not to mention, Best Picture of the Year of 1938. It's a classic crowd-pleasing tale of an eccentric family, the Sycamores, who have a lovely daughter played by Jean Arthur, who happens to be in love with her boss, Tony Kirby, adorably played by Jimmy Stewart, of course, in his first collaboration with Frank Capra. So in love, they become engaged, but the problem is, Tony's rich conglomerate snobbish parents, Mr. and Mrs. Anthony Kirby, played by Edward Arnold and Mary Forbes, don't approve of the family and try to buy the family out of their home for his own greed. This is indeed classic, wholesome, homespun, and utterly American family fun, which, when you know Capra's other famous films, you feel he can direct this kind of film in his sleep. But being at a time when a certain film he made the year before wasn't profiting, this was very much the wise decision to direct. And also being the president of the Academy at the time, he was still a big deal. One thing Capra was always phenomenal with was with his actors. Always. And this being a giant cast of powerhouse players like Lionel Barrymore, who had incorporated his own disability with the crutches in his character, and Spring Byington in an Oscar-nominated performance. I remember years and years ago watching this film with my high school theater class, and I've already seen it by that point, so I was just curious on how they would all react to this. And some scoffed at it because of its original old-fashioned flavor, and some were just clearly charmed by it. And that just goes to show how strong of a confident direction Capra had, who knew how to handle comedy well enough to ease anyone's heart, to turn a Scrooge into a happy, high-kicking caroler. Number 7, Lost Horizon. Ladies and gentlemen, I actually almost wish this was much higher. I really do, because after revisiting this film again, it is truly remarkable how impactful this film is, and with how much behind-the-scenes history this film has. Trailing a British diplomat, Robert Conway, played absolutely brilliantly by Ronald Colman, on a plane to Shanghai, until a sudden hijacking takes them to hell practically, resulting in a crash deep in the Himalayas, killing their hijacker. But then they find themselves in a heaven when they are rescued by H.B. Warner in an Oscar-nominated performance and his team, and lead them to the holy paradise known as Shangri-La. Each of them fall in love with this new haven, except for a few, of course. But it bears the question, should man luxuriate in paradise, knowledge, and prosperity after years of war and fighting? Or should we continue to explore, continue to fight, for human nature, debauchery, rebellion, and curiosity is ever so repetitive? Based on the classic novel by James Hilton, this film is such a monumental classic that has literally been through hell to make, with Capra giving everything he had, as you would absolutely expect. Capra was already a well-respected director, so there shouldn't be any issues, right? Except not enough resources being provided for the grand scale of this picture. His budget was only $1.2 million, which is a lot in those days. But when you have 4 miles of ammonia piping cooling the soundstage and the extreme cold leading to static electricity damaging the film stock, not to mention constant reshoots with other actors because you're also battling with your studio head, the infamous Cone, yeah, you are in frickin' trouble, with expenses now doubled over your budget. The original cut was 6 hours long, and they thought about releasing it in 2 separate films. Bit by bit, Cohn kept cutting it from 132 minutes to 128 minutes, which resulted in Capra just losing all faith. Audiences at the time weren't very enthusiastic, and all Cohn cared about was the profit. However, when you watch the full restored cut, which the latest one today is 132 minutes, 126 of those to the premiere soundtrack with stills and footage still being rediscovered. Everyone is mesmerized by its power and its weight. Capra carries the film with such power, and without a doubt, the most captivating sequence is when Coleman is leaving with the remaining group to go explore back home. Coleman pauses, and Capra sets up the camera so magnetically, where we see Coleman not wanting to leave, battling in his mind and his heart if he should abandon what he wanted to believe was total paradise. But he must go. It's such a moving sequence that should have gave Capra another Oscar nomination for Best Director, especially with what he went through. But no, only his assistant director, Charles Coleman, received one, back in those times when assistant directors received Oscars. However, with its 7 total Oscar nominations, including Best Picture, resulting in 2 wins for its art direction and editing, today it remains one of the greatest film adaptations of such a powerful book, which writer J.D. Salinger named his favorite film ever. Number 6, Lady for a Day. My goodness, how I wish I could place this much higher. Much higher, folks, because this Oscar-nominated classic is most definitely the first film to really expand the Capra spirit Frank always had on film. The soft tap of the human spirit to love through challenge and circumstance. There will always be a positive ending through it all. Based on the famous Damon Runyon short story, Madame Le Gimp, it's the precious story of Apple Annie, played absolutely astonishingly brilliantly by Mae Robeson in an Academy Award-nominated performance, which I still wholeheartedly believe she should have won. Sorry, Kate Hepburn, but she is a poor woman who sells apples in Times Square, but writes letters to her daughter about her luxurious life at the Hotel Marbury. However, Annie's life is really about to change when her daughter Louise writes back she's engaged to the son of the Count in Spain, and they want to meet her in New York before they get married. Annie now needs the help of Dave the Dude, played well by Warren William, to help Annie become the society matron she's lied about, but always dreamt about. A little bit of Pygmalion and a little bit of the old lady shows her medals, but all Capra and Riskin. Once again, Capra knows how to create community in his films. He was such an ensemble man, giving such light and love to character actors and supporting players, showing their strengths, their colors, and their beauty inside and out. It was a tough risk having your own film being headlined and led by essentially supporting actors with Robeson and William. But of course, when given the chance, they shine beautifully. The ending, without spoiling it, is quite improbable, and you don't want to believe they get away with the whole facade, but in a Capra film, it's always as if anything is possible. By the time we get to the final shot sequence of Louise sailing away with her fiancé, and we cut back to Annie waving back tearfully with all the people that helped her, we, the audience, are just erupting with joy. The message of her daughter not knowing the truth doesn't necessarily matter at that point. What mattered most is embracing the time she had with her daughter, and we really don't know when she will have that time again. This classic won big in the 4 significant Oscar nominations, including Best Actress, of course, Best Screenplay, Best Picture, and of course, Frank Capra's very first Academy Award nomination for Best Director. Funny enough, the night of the Oscars, Will Rogers read the envelope and said, "Come and get it, Frank," thinking he meant Capra won the Oscar for Best Director. But it was actually Frank Lloyd's win for Cavalcade. Not to worry, Frank, your time comes very, very soon. Number 5, Mr. Deeds Goes to Town. Of course, my friends, the Oscar-winning classic of 1936 that earned Capra his second Academy Award for Best Director in a picture that is surely beloved, so much that Adam Sandler tried his best to make a decent remake in his own style, which, to be honest, folks, it isn't really that bad. But it doesn't hold a candle to this essential original, starring good old Gary Cooper again as Longfellow Deeds, a tuba-playing co-owner of Italo Works, part-time greeting card poet of Mandrake Falls, Vermont, who all of a sudden receives the inheritance from his rich uncle of $20 million frickin' dollars. But he doesn't care about the money. He just wants to live his simple life with his friends. But he's forced to go to New York and handle business and is practically thrown to the wolves. One of which being Babe Bennett, a snooty reporter who takes on the persona of Mary Dawson to get any corruption out in the open and also make a fool of him. But how was she to know she would fall in love with him? This is one of the many somewhat small gems from Capra that he didn't expect to make. He was planning to make Lost Horizon first, but he had to hold off until Ronald Colman was available, and he saw this short magazine story called Opera Hat and thought it would make such a good film, partnering with his buddy Robert Riskin, of course, to do the script again. For their 7th collaboration here, Riskin earning an Oscar nod for his story construction, which he always has said was his personal favorite. This film was destined to be a hit. Capra did many, many innovative things for this picture as well. With Harry Cohn always cutting costs, he only allowed Capra to print 1 take of each scene. So Capra worked around it by shouting, "Do it again," instead of cut, so the actors would just repeat the scene again on top of multiple angles of scenes he would shoot, which he hadn't done that much before this film. It was like a great chance of experimenting for himself, which all the phenomenal directors do. There are so many amazing sequences as usual in this film, such as the iconic sequence of Deeds sliding down the staircase banister, the stage fright Jean Arthur reading one of Deeds' poems, which Capra originally wanted to cut. Thank goodness he kept it in because it's just lovely. Or more importantly, the utterly heartbreaking and heartwarming sequence of the farmer storming in the mansion with a gun, angry at the rich fat cats who refuse to help the working man and only beat them down. Deeds at first scoffs at this because he already knows like everyone's been lying to him, but comes to find out how sincere and true the farmer is, and the beautiful moment that it cuts to when he treats the farmer to a full dinner, as Deeds just watches and reflects on how he must help the people. It's such a sincere and classic Capra moment that always stands the test of time, of harsh reality and heartwarming sentimentality. Being another impactful film of the Great Depression, it unfolds itself so beautifully that it reached everyone, absolutely everyone of those horribly trying times. And what's amazing is how, after almost 88 years, it still remains relevant. The film, of course, was a giant hit, with novelist Graham Greene calling it Capra's best film at that point. And every time I watch this film, folks, it sure enough sends such a heartwarming feeling that I never ever want to lose. And neither should you. Number 4, Meet John Doe. Oh, how I love this film so much, guys, for it still is so relevant to today on the spirit of human beings based on a short story, of course, that being A Reputation, a 1922 short story in the Century magazine. We have Anne Mitchell, played amazingly, of course, by Barbara Stanwyck, a feisty columnist who's laid off from her job at the Bulletin and gets back at the paper by writing a suicidal letter using the anonymous name John Doe, threatening suicide based on how rough the world has become and all its ills. The paper loves it, so off they go to recruit the perfect schlub to play John Doe, and in walks penniless ex-baseball player Long John Willoughby, played marvelously by Gary Cooper, to take on the role. Even though the hope of the future is nothing he really has considered before, but little does he know that he would cause a whole new movement for the American people. This certainly has Capra written all over it, and it rightfully deserved its Oscar nomination for Best Story. Just so sad that that was the only nod it received. This was the first and sadly only film Capra made on his own with his very name, Frank Capra Productions, outside from Columbia, but distributed by Warner Brothers. And Capra really does not hold back from the power and weight of its story. It's also quite a grand scale of a film as well, with 57 set locations and 4,000 plus extras. Look at all the big rally scenes alone. It's spectacular. Like any Capra picture, my God, the performances make it absolutely worth it. From Cooper and Stanwyck, Edward Arnold, Walter Brennan, but also James Gleason's fantastic and moving performance as the newspaper editor, and even Regis Toomey's phenomenal supporting performance as Bert Hansen, who has that tremendous monologue to John Doe. The ending, of course, is so powerful, and it's amazing with after 4 different ending ideas, they finally found a mail-in ending which honestly worked out perfectly well. Because, spoiler alert, John Doe, by the point of this ending, he had to jump. He had to jump and commit suicide. He just had to. That was the only way out, practically. But the only way to pull him out had to be Stanwyck. And on Christmas Eve, of course, classic Capra. It might be crazy to love this film more than, say, Mr. Deeds Goes to Town or Lady for a Day. But honestly, guys, this film has such a strong message to never forget the quote-unquote little characters of this world that make the big things of this world great. It's all about the John Does of America. And forgive me for getting patriotic for a second, but that's what I always loved about Capra's films. Pure Americana. Through all the BS, all the terror, the horrible things about this country, there always has to be love. Love for your fellow man. Love for your land. Love for your country. Okay, I'm off my soapbox now. But don't you see what Frank Capra's films do to me? Number 3, It Happened One Night. Yes, indeed, one of the greatest romantic comedies of all time, and has been argued as the first screwball comedy ever made of 1934, which that honor really has to go to Howard Hawks' 20th Century, which came out that same year, funny enough. However, It Happened One Night to this day is also regarded as being Capra's very best film, based on the short story again, this time Night Bus in the Cosmopolitan magazine. It's the glorious and precious story of a spoiled heiress, Ellie, played by Claudette Colbert, who ties the knot with a society aviator against her father's wishes. So he stops her with his yacht, only to have Ellie literally jump ship and go missing. She winds up in Florida on the night bus, get it, to New York, and then meets Peter, a brash yet charming reporter played absolutely brilliantly by Clark Gable, who recently loses his job. So once he recognizes Ellie, he figures, I'll make a juicy story out of this and get his job back, not to mention some sweet reward money. But it's a long trip back from Florida to New York. Should one or both of them fall in love with each other? This film has everything that makes it one of the greatest of all time. Charm, hilarity, strength, confidence, fast pacing, perfect stars and actors, excellent dialogue, and it's amazing how it was one of the most stressful. Being the classic case of Gable being punished by his home studio MGM and borrowed from Columbia to do this picture against his will. Same for Colbert, who hated the script and didn't want to work with Capra again after making For the Love of Mike together back in 1927. Columbia at this time was such a low-rate studio that anybody who did a movie for them was indeed like a jail sentence. Screenwriting buddy Robert Riskin would definitely turn the script around and rewrite it to fit the flavors of Gable and Colbert so perfectly. Frank Capra directs this utterly perfectly, mapping out all the gags just precisely, but most importantly, grounding the actors in their chemistry. There's no one better than Gable and Colbert in these roles, even after heavy-hitting stars like Robert Montgomery, Miriam Hopkins, Myrna Loy, Margaret Sullivan, Frederick March, Constance Bennett. Betty Davis even would turn it down. Carol Lombard would turn it down too, only because she had another film to make. It's truly amazing, with all the stress of making a good picture, Capra still kept a positive position, as he should, being the director. He claims it as being at the right place at the right time, how he went with the flow with this one, laughing through it all and just needing to enjoy himself around his company. And that's the kind of leader and director that makes the best of the best. Who can ever forget the classic sequence of The Hitchhiker's Hail with Gable's old thumb doing the trick to nothing, and then Colbert stepping out and exposing her own leg to stop the next car. Classic. Or the Great Walls of Jericho clothing separation sequence, where we see these two really falling for each other. It's just genius, resulting of course in its big 5 Academy Award nominations, winning all 5, including Screenplay, Best Actor and Actress for Gable and Colbert, Best Picture, and of course, Best Director for Capra. You look on any giant list from every critic circle and magazine, and they hold It Happened One Night as one of the greatest comedies of all time, which I absolutely love. But don't hold that against me. I'm a little screwy myself. Number 2, Mr. Smith Goes to Washington. God, ladies and gentlemen, to this day, it remains one of the greatest and most brilliant films about power, greed, politics, corruption, and the hopeful positive ideals of America. Starring, of course, the amazing Jimmy Stewart as Jefferson Smith, a naive, idealistic Boy Scout, or, Boy Ranger leader, who was appointed as the senator of, it's never revealed, but if you know the story of which the movie is based off of, the gentleman from Montana, well, there you go. And he is taken under the wing of his father's best friend, Senator Joseph Payne, played brilliantly by Claude Rains, and he must go along with the corruption brewing right under his nose at the Capitol. But with the push of once jaded Secretary Miss Saunders, played wonderfully by Jean Arthur, he will take the political machine before the Senate and filibuster against the corruption and fight for a better America. Originally conceived to be a sequel to Mr. Deeds Goes to Town, Capra made the right decision in making a whole new story and a whole new character for this adventure, which still resonates amazingly today. Which, this being an election year, it's almost imperative to watch this film on repeat in the year of 2024. Capra took so many risks while making this film, from sneaking their way of filming Stewart's montage of touring Washington, D.C. when they weren't supposed to, building a whole recreation of the Senate chamber, which was 3 levels and sat 400 people inside, creating nightmares for the sound crew, cameramen, and Capra. So it was smart to have a multicam setup, going $288,000 over budget, not to mention all the flack he and producer Harry Cohn got for the film's showcase of corruption in D.C. The countless controversy from all around the world, especially from the Senate, to not distribute the film overseas was too aggravating. But Capra stuck to his guns like a real leader, knowing how powerful the film's message would resonate with the people. Because that's just the very thing. Capra didn't make pictures for politicians. He made them for the people. Nevertheless, the film was labeled by most politicians as un-American and painted politicians in such a bad light. Shocking. But the way Capra guides us through this powerful story is truly mesmerizing. From the amazing sequence of Stewart fumbling his hat when Payne's daughter walks in, to the suspensefully thrilling sequences in the Senate chamber, more so when Smith gets up and defends himself. God, how I love the whole filibustering sequence, which obviously everyone remembers and knows so well, with Stewart giving everything he has and us fighting alongside him. How Capra takes us through the highs and lows of every moment in the film, like the beautiful final moment Smith has when you feel he's defeated. Oh, but he's not liked. And I'm going to stay right here and fight for this lost cause, even this room gets filled with lies like these. It still has such power that continues to inspire and still bring tears to my eyes. The film received 11 Oscar nominations of the year of 1939, one of the greatest years of film ever, with The Wizard of Oz, Goodbye Mr. Chips, The Adventures of Robin Hood, Gone with the Wind, Stagecoach, Ninotchka, The Rules of the Game, and so on, winning only one for Best Original Story. I say it was massively snubbed. Even though I love Victor Fleming's shots in Gone with the Wind, that Oscar, to me, belonged to Frank Capra. For Frank Capra certainly was Jefferson Smith personified and fought for the lost causes harder than any other. All right there, folks. Now here are some honorable mentions for you. Pocketful of Miracles, which is absolutely beloved by so many, of course, adapted by Capra himself from Lady for a Day, with this time Bette Davis stepping in the role of Apple Annie. Though originally slated for Shirley Booth as well as Helen Hayes, Capra really wanted to remake this one for some time, same as Broadway Bill, of course, but couldn't get the money. So he ended up partnering with Glenn Ford with his company, Newton Pictures, with Frank Capra's production company to form Frampton Pictures. Cute, and the tension, headaches, and stress progressed for Capra. He absolutely hated Glenn Ford, since Glenn was interfering with Capra's casting choices, including Hope Lang, Ford's girlfriend at the time. Capra was hugely disappointed with the final result, but he said Peter Falk's freaking hilarious Oscar-nominated performance was the saving grace, and I totally agree with Capra 100%. But it did earn 2 additional Oscar nods as well, and it's still beloved by many, so not bad at all being Capra's very last film. Ladies of Leisure, the very first collaboration between Capra and Stanwyck, which almost did not happen. Capra's autobiography stated how he saw her screen test and didn't see anything worth noticing, looking like she didn't want the part. And it took the role of Stanwyck's husband at the time, Frank Fay, to call up Capra and say, give her another chance. He watched Stanwyck's screen test for the version of The Noose, which she didn't get, and immediately convinced Harry Cohn to sign her. The film itself works magically thanks to the upcoming star power and partnership of Stanwyck and Capra. And with Capra's own script, you see how passionate and fiery a writer he was, rewriting the whole thing based on the play Ladies of the Evening, before Joe Swirling took over. It's a simple story about an artist from a wealthy family who hires a party girl as his model, played of course by Stanwyck. They get to know each other, the girl begins to regret her past, and the two fall in love, but they must face his family's strong opposition to their union. The film was a giant hit and made Stanwyck a star immediately, and even Capra thought the film would be honored by the Academy for Best Picture and, of course, Best Actress, resulting in 0 nods. Can't win them all, can you? But still, all of you Capra fans know how important this film is indeed. The Bitter Tea of General Yen. Based on the 1930 novel, this was very much another experimental venture for Capra, which is visually stunning, if not, shall we say, a bit too much. Barbara Stanwyck stars once again as a Christian missionary who gets separated by her fiancé in Shanghai, knocked on the head during an attack, and is rescued by General Yen. Slowly over time, she begins to fall in love with the general, even though she's unsure this is the right thing to do. Obviously, this is not quite a film that has aged well today, due to the fact you have a Swedish actor, Nils Astor, playing in Asian in Yellowface. Yeah, not good. But you have to admit the great progressive steps in this film, incorporating interracial sexual attraction with a dream sequence of Stanwyck's character being attacked by the general, and shows the general as such an evil, vampiric-like creature. And the American will save her, but comes to realize how wrong and racist it is. The film was also one of the first films to premiere at Radio City Music Hall upon its opening on January 6, 1933. Capra worked very creatively on it. He thought for sure he would get an Oscar nomination for directing it, but Harry Cohn wasn't helping him on that. All in all, it's very much a film where Capra tested himself and found his own technique, and he needed to make this film in order to really find himself. The Miracle Woman, the second collaboration between Stanwyck and Capra, which is surprisingly a fantastic film, with Stanwyck playing a daughter of an unappreciated minister who recently died. So she loses her faith and decides to preach herself and perform fake miracles for money. But perhaps her faith could be restored when real love and miracles start happening. Based on the play Bless You Sister, and then basically later remade as Leap of Faith with Steve Martin, this film works on all levels because of how swift Capra is with the camera, how his direction hits hard with the film's action, not to mention leading Stanwyck was such a powerhouse performance as well. The way her condemnation on the churchgoers is shot is so intense and powerful. You see how energetic Capra is behind the camera with dramatic action. Arsenic and old lace. Yes, of course, not everyone's favorite, indeed, but hey, tie me up and torture me like Mortimer. I adore this film, and so do thousands upon thousands. Every Halloween, it comes a staple for most. Based, of course, on the classic Kesselring play, we have Cary Grant hamming it up as Mortimer, who comes to tell his two beloved aunts the news of his engagement, coming to find something even more interesting and quite funny in the cellar. Oh, you know, just a dead body. Then discovering his aunt's favorite hobby of murdering lonely older men. Capra loved filming this so much that he thoroughly enjoyed every actor going over the top, especially Grant, which Grant hated, of course. Capra said he would fix it in the cutting room, but after the attack on Pearl Harbor, Capra enlisted himself, and the film was shelved for 3 years. It still released a positive box office and reviews, even though today, not so much, but this film will always hold a dear place in fans' hearts because Capra never forgot the joy of making audiences laugh, especially during a time of peril around the world. Number 1, It's a Wonderful Life. Buffalo Gals, is this really a surprise? Well, I certainly didn't think so. If y'all haven't heard it before, you all will know now. It's a Wonderful Life is not only my favorite Christmas movie ever, it is also my favorite movie of all time. The film has picked me up at a time of emotional peril and despair, and it continues to do so to this very, very day. I watch it multiple times a year, especially on Christmas Eve. And of course, I am not the only one around the world. It is just such a perfect film. And when cinephiles really think about the genius of Frank Capra, there really is no film of his that is so universally known as compared to the monumental and delightful tale of George Bailey growing up in his home small town, Bedford Falls. But every year, it feels like all his hopes and dreams are getting crushed, and he becomes stuck in his hometown, never really experiencing life, and only becoming an average schnook, taking the fall of the biggest mistake that could destroy his father's company. So on Christmas Eve, he will throw away God's greatest gift. But that clock-making angel just may save his life, showing him the world of Bedford Falls without the existence of George Bailey. George Bailey will always be my hero, ladies and gentlemen, as he too was affected by his left ear, which cost him his hearing, which was actually Jimmy Stewart's own result from serving in the Air Force. He had big dreams to see the world and conquer it, build skyscrapers, and practically build more of America and become something great. But responsibility and love of family and friends have kept him from exploring. Not only can I relate to that, but millions all across the world can. What I love so much is that this was both Capra and Stewart's first film they would make after serving in the war, after Capra made his Why We Fight documentary series, of course. Capra simply called up Jimmy and said, "You want to make another one together?" Apparently that's how he talked. Of course, they both hopped to the chance because the script that Capra helped develop from a simple Christmas card called The Greatest Gift by Philip Van Soren Stern, with the further help of Clifford Odets, Dalton Trumbo, Mark Connolly, Francis Goodrich, and Albert Hackett, was just too precious and genius to pass up. Frank Capra put everything into this film, founding Liberty Films, his other independent production company with William Wyler and George Stevens, going as far as the technical crew creating their own snow using foamite, soap, and water, which they later received a Class 3 technical Oscar for their work, building from scratch the whole town of Bedford Falls, which took practically 2 months, going through 3 DPs because of Capra's precise perfectionism with this story particularly, and even the sweetest of actions with one of the crew members accidentally dropping a tray of props during Uncle Billy's exit after Harry's welcome home party. Wasn't supposed to happen. Thanks to the brilliance of Thomas Mitchell as Uncle Billy yelling, "I'm all right, I'm all right." The take works magically, and the crew member thinking he was going to get fired, Capra came right up and gave him a bonus for adding magic to that take. Everything about this film makes it one of the greatest films of all time, from the utterly gorgeous beginning montage of Bedford Falls, all the townspeople praying for George, to the incredible lens blow-up on Jimmy Stewart's heartbreaking scene at Martini's bar, praying. Capra, knowing he couldn't get another take out of Jimmy, decided to blow up the frame, so we can really feel what George is going through in that moment. It's utterly divine camera work. By the very end of the picture, we are all in tears of joy. And if you're like me, you're in tears all the way through. Frank Capra's ultimate masterpiece was only nominated for 5 Oscars, including Best Editing, Best Sound, Best Actor, of course, for Jimmy, Best Picture, and Best Director for Frank. It sadly was overlooked due to the monumental success of William Wyler's The Best Years of Our Lives, and also flopped at the box office, putting the production company Liberty Films out of business just 3 years later after he made State of the Union. But obviously, we know what has the last laugh. You could argue the lack of immediate success for this film was the downfall of Capra and why he retired so soon as he did. But whatever fails at one point will find an audience somewhere in the future, as this did in the early 1970s when it was syndicated on television. It's a Wonderful Life remains the greatest to this day, folks. Cherished every year, all over the globe, raising our spirits, touching our souls, and always reminding us that no one is a failure when you have friends. It's easy to see, of course, why Capra's masterpiece here was personally his own favorite of all the films he did. And he had a phenomenal list of films he made. When you watch his amazing documentary, Frank Capra's American Dream, you see even more how much of an impact he made with people's hearts to pursue the arts, like Martin Scorsese, Francis Ford Coppola, Spielberg, Peter Bogdanovich, practically all the new pioneers of filmmaking in the late 1960s and 1970s. You wouldn't think of that considering how violent and risque the themes were, but deep inside, those filmmakers were really reaching for an America like Capra's idea. An America where you can be whatever you want, where no matter how insignificant you felt you were, you could battle the fat cat heavy corporate political machine and change the world. An America where it was your America, where this land really is made for you and me. Maybe I'm getting a little too sentimental and cheesy again, but you can't deny the power of what Frank Capra had and transferred to the films that are cherished in people's homes, minds, and souls for generations. Yes, Capra has made mistakes. He was not perfect, for crying out loud, who is? But who else has an adjective named after them, like he does with Capra-esque? His great accomplishments, such as the Why We Fight World War II documentary series he did while serving, are among the greatest documentaries of the time, one of which, Prelude to War, winning the Oscar for Best Documentary. Being awarded the AFI Lifetime Achievement Award in 1982, awarded the National Medal of the Arts, and listed on every single critic circle and board as one of the top 10 most inspirational directors of all time. Maybe it is true with what the amazing writer, director, actor, producer John Cassavetes has said. Maybe there really wasn't an America. Maybe it was only Frank Capra. Holy mackerel, that's the end of it. So tell me, my classic film-loving friends, do you agree with my picks? What are your favorite films of one of the true greats, Frank Capra? Oh, please list in those comments below. I'd love to hear your thoughts as always. If you like this, please click like, subscribe, and please, oh please, my friends, it is my birthday month, and you know what I would love? If you would all check out the Patreon page and add a little support. And I promise you won't regret it with what you receive in return. Just ask these beloved patrons listed right here. No pressure, of course, but it sure would mean a lot to me. But in the meantime, my friends, thank you so much again for watching, and I'd be a fool if I didn't say Merry Christmas! And have a Happy New Year, my friends. Let's make this new year a one of joy, progress, and impact. Wake up, John Doe's. You're the hope of the world.